As you heard, this little story came about in Reverend Greg's Shared Pulpit workshop. I do recommend that course, so thank you to Reverend Greg for that. And thank you all for listening. And special hello to Lori in Minnesota. My story starts with the words, "Bloom where you are planted." I first saw these words on a bookmark my mother sent me in college. My first reaction was to think, where else would you bloom? My secondary and real, maybe unacknowledged reaction was, what does that even mean? I was in the middle of nowhere at a college where construction at the library meant that I couldn't rely on one of my favorite places, and that a great dust hung over the campus. Even the green trees looked gray. I was living with a roommate who practiced making poor decisions every season, which is to say, I lived alone with someone I couldn't relate to. The English classes I was taking were boring. The required readings trite, sentimental, unrealistic, or ancient, in some unrelatable. The professors were much more jaded and conservative and old than the ones I had enjoyed at the community college I had attended previously. This school where I spent 2 years was not a place for me to plant myself or for me to be planted. I was just passing through on the way to something I knew nothing about. You might think that I had been planted in kindred with my family, but that's not quite accurate. My mother had never done what I was doing, and being practical, took practical and efficient steps to support me. She sent the bookmark knowing I read a lot of books and would certainly need and use a bookmark, but she never had received moral support, so she couldn't offer moral support. I didn't realize it like that at the time. I just thought my mother was useless. Nonetheless, my mother had her own rebellions, whether successful or not, and she and I recognized each other for that. I was never supposed to be in college in the first place. The head of our household declared that girls didn't need college to stay home and cook and clean. As it was, I not only had to figure out college on my own, but I had to rebel against my family to even attend in the first place. I had long described myself as a daffodil bulb. I was all potential. I was in the dark, underground, and unseen. Only with the right light would I begin to grow and blossom. That sunlight never shone on me. I was a secret to myself, for I am sure a daffodil bulb does not know what it will become. I had no idea what it meant to be planted, to grow roots, to send up shoots, to blossom. Blooming was something I just didn't know about. So when I received that bookmark in the mail, I tucked it into the bottom of the box that held the bookmark collection, which I still have. Whenever I pick up a book, I pick out the bookmark to go with it, matching the bookmark to my mood and to the book. How many years did that bookmark remain untouched? After college, I was still looking for an elusive something that I believed was out there for me. I was just afloat on a blue orb, moving from what seemed one gray workplace or living space to another, all temporary. I drifted and I was bored. I was reading novel after novel, and every character's life seemed so much more satisfactory than mine. At least they had real problems. I wanted life filled with problems, not boredom. I wanted to be involved, not just float by and through a life I had no idea how to live. After all that, at long last, I arrived to an endlessly sunny climate. I had no idea what to expect when I arrived at Rota Naval Base, Spain, with a new husband. I knew that again, this would be temporary, just 3 years, but somehow the ground felt firmer and the sky more open. The sunshine never stopped shining, literally. It shined every day. I finally had real problems. I had to figure out how to get hot water and where to buy shoes, and how not to say a head of lettuce, but to say a lettuce at the corner farm stall. I got to walk everywhere, and I got to convert pesetas and kilometers in my head. Suddenly, any American would be friendly. We were a minority, and we needed each other. Life seemed more real. I wore only Spanish clothes, and I was mistaken, to my great delight, for a native of the area. I picked up where I left off college Spanish. I hired a Spanish tutor. I took flamenco lessons from a gypsy who used to dance on tour. I taught English to Spanish community members. The sun shone every day, and it was easy to forget the rest of the world existed, since, of course, I would not read the military newspaper, and I watched Spanish local news, comprehending just enough, I thought. My greatest challenge turned out to be finding books to read. I had to read, and there was no English bookstore in town. Therefore, as you can imagine, the most important place on the base for me was the library. I can still remember the Naval Base road to the library, where the bunker-like building squatted on a dusty plot. No rain, no grass. The crude signpost indicating library, pointed to a gray, flat-roofed, square metal box without windows. 3 weathered wooden steps led to the beige, heavy metal door. Inside were circular spinning racks galore, crammed with Western romance and mystery paperbacks, books I never read. Beyond those racks, gray metal shelving units stood shakily. The sunshine did not shine in the library. Everything was wrong. Books were shelved crazily, both fiction and nonfiction. The selection was worn and dreadfully old. No money was allocated for new book purchases. Dust hovered in the air. I argued constantly with the librarian. I felt sorry and enraged at once, because the turnover and obvious lack of knowledge or experience among the librarian caused crazy confusions, like what happened one day when I went to the shelves to pick out a fiction by Mark Twain, and the librarian told me it was shelved under C for Samuel Clemens. A new librarian who arrived early during the time I was there discontinued interlibrary loan. She was perfectly fit for work on a military base, as she was as firm as she was precise in letting me know that she would not file the paperwork or carry books to the airport for transport to and from any of those well-funded air bases in Germany, where the card catalog told me a copy of the book I wanted existed. I could hardly find anything I wanted to read. So I took my issue to the top. I wrote to the commander of the base. He couldn't muster any interest in the library, so I turned my attention to the bookstore on base. The selection was quite similar, with aisles of paperbacks that didn't appeal to me, and none of what I cared about at the time: feminism, books by women, books about women. More letters to the commander about the poor selection at the bookstore earned me a meeting with the buyer, who happened to be coming into town. He walked and talked fast. From behind him, I said, "There's no women's books." Without hesitation, he took me to the appropriate aisle and pointed. There they are. Indeed, cookbooks and craft books were for sale. He talked over my protest, and he did not look at me, but at the paperwork in his hands. "The store caters to the fleet," he said. Finally, he closed the meeting as if we had had one. He said, "The commander is happy with sales." That's when I knew that I was the only one who cared what I read. I was talking to people who weren't listening and who dismissed me even before they heard what I had to say. My reading material, my fulfillment wasn't their concern. It could only be mine. Even though I had had experience with that kind of dismissal, I thought that because the sun shone every day, my life would be different. It was in many ways, but I was still thrust among people for whom hierarchy and rule and money were the priority. However, I would most adamantly not go without books, so I was forced to change. I realized I had to do something different. I decided to choose books a new way. I went back to the library and I started at the top left shelf at the very back corner of the library. I pulled out each book one by one. I looked and I decided one by one. When I got to the end of the row, I moved to the next until I had several books I could take home. Next time I went, I picked up at the spot I had left off, and I went book by book. This is how I found enough good books to keep me reading for 3 years. They were there. They were miscatalogued or misspelled or mismarked or marked missing. Most often they were books I would never have thought to read, but they were perfect for any given sunny day. When I came home with my first armload of books from the library, I sorted through my bookmark box and found the most appropriate bookmark was the one I had never chosen before. I picked out the one my mother had given me just about a decade earlier. Bloom where you are planted. At last, I understood what it means to bloom where you are planted. I had finally done just that. What's great about daffodils is that it takes one bulb to make a flower. They form clumps of bulbs and flowers, but they can start out individually. That's the kind of thing that happened in Spain. The sun was out, and the daffodil peeked above the soil. When I returned to the States, I saw that the blue of the sky was dull, and even when the sun was shining, I noticed that people's mood dampened when it rained. Winter came too, for the first time in 3 years. Plants went dormant. That is the cycle we witness annually. I found out that I wasn't going to bloom continuously forever. Every blossom fades color and green leaves turn brown. But when daffodils have finished blooming and their fronds turn brown, those same fronds are drawing energy into the bulb for the next season's bloom. That is why gardeners say not to cut them off. Let the leaves wither in place. They may appear to be dying, but they are working on restoration of a life force deep within and unseen. And they are using the energy of the sun to do it. When I know that my own bloom is fading, all I feel is the dread of the deadness oncoming. I feel like I am drooping frond by frond until I end up flattened on the ground. I fight against it. I struggle to keep those sad fronds upright, searching for a sun that itself ascends and descends annually across the skies. I feel forlorn, and I don't remember that the energy is going toward future regrowth. I am always late in remembering there is a powerful bulb buried inside that I have used before to regenerate. If only I could learn to remember earlier. Daffodils always come back. Bloom where you are planted.